Hey everybody, welcome back to Kimmell and Cox, your source for all things entertainment. I'm Keith Cox. I'm joined as always by my good friend Dylan Kimmell.
Well, hello everyone.
And today we will be concluding our episode on the Back to the Future trilogy with Back to the Future Part 3.
Part 3?
Yes. Released on May 25th, 1990. Not very far behind Part 2. And we'll get into the reasons behind that in just a little bit. But the final film in the trilogy was, again, written by Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale and directed by Robert Zemeckis. And starring Michael J. Fox as Marty McFly and Seamus McFly, which is Marty's great-great-grandfather. Christopher Lloyd as Doc Brown. Mary Steenburgen as Clara Clayton, have a new character there in this movie. Tom Wilson as Buford Mad Dog Tannen, as well as Biff Tannen. Leah Thompson as Maggie McFly and Lorraine McFly. And Elizabeth Shue is back briefly as Marty's girlfriend, Jennifer Parker. And then we have a few other returning cast members as well, like James Tolkien, except this time he's playing Marshall Strickland instead of Principal Strickland. And you also have Mark McClure and Wendy Jo Sperber back for the first time since the first movie as Marty's brother and sister, Dave and Linda. We didn't really mention them in the first when we talked about the first film. But
it's funny because you kind of forget that he has siblings, anyways.
Yeah, because they weren't in very many scenes. Like in the first movie, they were just in kind of like the first part and the end of the movie. But the thing is they're good characters. Both of them are good characters. And Mark McClure also. Some of you may recognize him from another really famous movie franchise, Superman, because he played Jimmy Olsen in the Christopher Reeve Superman franchise.
I honestly did not put the two together, but now that you've said that, I'm like, oh.
Yeah. But yeah, it's we definitely shouldn't have forgotten them. They are a part of the movie. They're not. They are significant. To the story. They're not just throwaway characters. But anyway, they do make a little appearance in this as well. So Part 3. There's a very good reason why Part 3 was released in such close proximity to Part 2. Because if you remember, Part 2 was released in November of 1989. So we're talking about 6 months, in between each movie. Mm-hmm. Well, they filmed parts 2 and 3 back to back. It was like over an 11-month period that they shot both movies with only like a 3-week break in between filming on each. So that's pretty intense.
Yeah, filming movies back to back. Now that is a very stressful thing. That means a bigger schedule. You're probably filming for longer, and unprecedented. It can be unprecedented, anyways.
Yeah.
I'm not for sure if Back to the Future was the first one to do that. I'm pretty sure there was a couple of others. Actually, if I think back to Superman, I think they filmed some of Superman 2 together.
Yes,
yeah.
Because originally.
Originally, Richard Donner was supposed to direct Superman 2.
Yes, and so he had decided to film both movies back to back, and then of course they fired him, brought in Richard Lester to finish the movie. He reshot some scenes, but most of Richard Donner's version survived, which eventually later on they did release the Richard Donner cut.
Much better cut, honestly.
Yes, it is. So it wasn't the first. Movie to do that, but one of the first. There weren't, like I said, there weren't many before that did that.
Yeah, and then afterwards you get one that did 3 at the same time, Lord of the Rings.
Right, and some of those make sense, and I think Harry Potter did that a lot too, because especially if you're starting with younger actors, like if they're kids when you start out, you can't let them like age too much if they're supposed to be within relatively the same time frame. It's like you don't want them to start going through puberty and everything when they're supposed to be
that actually
kids.
Reminds me of something that was brought to my attention about. Now this is off topic, but it's relevant in the fact that we're talking about age difference. Aged up actors or whatever. James Cameron he's working on the Avatar sequels, right? He's making several more Avatar sequels,
right?
And he has kids involved in them. So what he did is he filmed all the scenes with the kids as they were then. All those scenes were filmed for future movies and everything like that, so that he gets them at the right age for that scene and everything. There's no continuity errors or whatever with aged up actors or whatever, and he doesn't have to do the de-aging because sometimes that's really
it just
weird.
Kind of unless it's done really well,
it's really weird.
It kind of cheapens the look of the film, I think. But
It Chapter 2, they de-aged the kids in there because they are now grown up and everything.
Right. So sometimes there can be a little there's a lot of activity going on out there.
Wow.
But so it's with a movie like that, it's interesting because obviously the director had intentions of making more movies, so he could do that. He could go ahead and film those scenes and then save them for a future sequel. In this case, of course, as we know, Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale had no intentions of making a sequel to Back to the Future. So if I recall, I think when they wrote the sequel, I think that the events of Part 2 and Part 3 were originally one script. It was going to be one movie. So they were literally going to go from 1985 to 2015, back to alternate 1985, and then to 1955, and finally to 1885, all in the same movie. But it became apparent to them that obviously this movie was going to be way too long, and it was going to be impossible to it was going to be too much to fit into one movie. So then they decided to split it into two, and I think that's why they filmed them back to back, because they originally had intentions of doing it all as one film. They're like, nope, let's split it. Let's take a break in between, take a few weeks off, and then go back and film the rest of it. And I think it worked out much better that way, splitting it into, because now it made it into a trilogy, and it really stands up perfectly as a trilogy. I think as we'll find out here, I think they wrap things up pretty nicely, and I think they conclude the trilogy very well. So a lot of people have mixed feelings about the third movie. I know some people that say they think it's the worst in the trilogy. They can't stand it for whatever reason. I like Part 3 myself. There's a lot of things I like about it. It for one thing, it kind of gets away from the special effects aspect of the movies a little bit. Not that the special effects weren't great, because they were all, they were revolutionary for their time, but it was nice to sort of get away from that a little bit. And so there's a little bit, it's a little bit more focused on story and a practical just action sequences and things like that. It's a Western pretty much. And I like Westerns. I like that style of movie.
I believe it's every actor's dream to be in a Western.
Yeah. And I think the cast really enjoyed it too. They they taught them all how to ride horses, and I think they taught Tom Wilson how to how to rope, how to swing a lasso.
You can tell that everyone's having fun with this one.
Yeah.
I think they're having more fun with this one than they were even the second one, to be honest with you.
Oh, yeah.
You can definitely tell it on Tom Wilson's face. He's really enjoying that role, even though he's still playing a dick.
Yeah.
He's
I think, and I could be wrong about this, but I think a lot of the actors who worked in the movies, I think the majority of them cited the third one as their favorite. I could
think
be
even
wrong
Michael
about
J.
that.
Fox has said that too. Yeah. I think I seem to recall him saying that he really wanted to be in a Western for a long time, and then he got to do that with that one. So he had a lot of fun with that. Well, with the exception of getting hung in that one scene.
Yeah. And actually, I believe he mentions this in his first book. He's written 3 memoirs now, and in his first one called Lucky Man, I seem to recall that he mentioned, because it wasn't long after that, it was about a year after that he started showing signs of Parkinson's disease. It started with a little tremor in his pinky finger, was how he noticed it. It just wouldn't stop shaking. He was like in his hotel room or something one night and noticed it. But I think he mentioned in that book, and again I could be wrong because I haven't read it in a while, but I think he mentioned that scene where Buford Tannen tries to hang Marty. When you do a hanging scene in a movie, you're supposed to rig up the noose in a way that you're supposed to leave just enough space for you to be able to squeeze your arm your hand in between the rope and your neck, so that it's not, legitimately like cutting off your circulation, your oxygen. But I believe he speculated that because the first time they did like two cuts of that scene. For 2 takes, I mean. The first take, I guess something, went wrong, and so when they shot the second take, there was something wrong with the noose or whatever, and so it was actually like choking him legitimately, and it was, it was already starting to cut off the oxygen supply to his brain, before they yelled cut, figured out what was going on. And I think he speculated that because he was up there for longer than he should have been, choking, that obviously Parkinson's disease
contributed to it.
Is a neurological disease, and that could have been the thing that triggered the Parkinson's. We don't know, but
it's hard to say.
Yeah. But interesting, to think that could have very easily, his battle with Parkinson's could have been started, with that little mishap. But who really knows? But no, it's to me it's just a fun movie. I think it's really enjoyable to watch, and they kind of poke fun at the Western genre a little bit because. In the beginning, Doc dresses Marty in this really outlandish.
Oh yeah, he dresses him up in this little getup that's like it's an awful looking thing. He's like, I don't know, Doc, this doesn't look right.
Yeah, he's like Clint Eastwood would never wear anything like this, and he's
Clint
like,
who?
It's like, oh, that's right, you haven't heard of him yet. And the thing was Clint Eastwood was only just starting to. Become known. I think the TV series Rawhide, which is what really brought him into the public eye. I want to say I think that did come out in 1955, but maybe it was a little bit later in 55 or something. So, but it was just funny because westerns that were made, up to that time, and in like the 1940s and 50s, and they were not authentic, It's like they wore these the cowboys, that's what Hollywood thought a cowboy was supposed to look like, and they would wear these really bright colored outfits with a lot of fringe and big shiny belt buckles, and it was totally like it was just a costuming thing, but they weren't going for, I guess, authenticity, and so that was the joke. There was that because that's what he'd seen on TV. Doc thought this is authentic. This is what cowboys wore back then. But then of course once Marty goes back to 1885, then they go for more of the traditional, the authentic Western look.
The funny thing is that he throws away the boots when he travels. He's like, right. Oh,
He's still wearing his Nikes, you know, even though Doc warned him. You know, it's like Marty, you can't wear those futuristic things. You know, in 1885, you shouldn't even be wearing them here in 1955. And he's like, don't worry, Doc, I'll put them on as soon as I get there. And
he doesn't even get the chance.
He doesn't get the chance to.
And honestly, even it didn't matter what Doc said, because what he dresses him in is still not right either.
Right.
But going back, the scene that prompts them to send him back to the future, to the Wild West, of course, as we mentioned, was Doc was transported.
In part 2, yeah. He was accidentally transported to 1885 because lightning struck the DeLorean.
And he actually says in the letter, he says, "Do not come back for me."
Yeah, he didn't want Marty to come back. He was perfectly happy. You know, he had been, when he wrote Marty the letter, he had already been living in Hill Valley 1885 for like 8 months. So he had set himself up as a blacksmith, and you know, he was doing great. He loved it. He loved living in the Old West. So
except 2 days later, after he sent that letter, he gets shot in the back.
Yeah, which they discover. You know, when Doc writes Marty the letter, he tells him that he's stored the DeLorean away in an abandoned mine shaft near an old. It's like Boot Hill Cemetery, like an old, you know, Western cemetery. So Marty and the 1955 Doc go and uncover the DeLorean and make some repairs to it, and kind of rig up because the time circuits got destroyed in the lightning strike. So Doc had to rig up some new time circuits using materials that he had there in 1955, and basically rigged up this thing on the hood of the DeLorean. And so Doc sends, you know, like, you know, Marty's like, you know, despite Doc's wishes, he's like, you know, I can't leave him, you know, back in, you know, 1885, and so he you know, gets 1955 Doc to help him, you know, send him back to 1885.
Even 1955 Doc is like, I don't want that life. Go ahead and save my butt there.
Right, yeah. And so there's some great stuff there, like they send Marty back. They go to this old drive-in movie theater, and it's out in Monument Valley in California, which is it was used a lot, like back in the day, for filming westerns and everything. It has such a great look to it. You have all these big bluffs and cliffs and everything, and the dirt kind of has this like red. It's like a red clay, you know, kind of. And it's a really cool looking place.
I think they film scenes for that when they have like a Mars scene also.
Yeah. It's great for desert scenes and westerns and stuff like that. And so the drive-in, the movie theater screen has this artwork adorning it with all these Indians on horseback.
And it is a funny line that Marty gives. He's like, "Man, I don't know. I mean, I'm going to drive right into those Indians in there." And Doc's like, "Oh, those Indians won't be there.
Yeah,
don't worry about it."
He's like, you know, he's like Marty. He's like, you're not thinking fourth dimensionally.
Fourth dimensional. Yeah.
He's like, by the time you know, hit that screen, those Indians won't even be there. And, you know, Marty kind of has his doubts or whatever. And then, you know, and then, of course, when he does, like right before he hits the movie screen, he hits 88 miles an hour. And as soon as he passes that point, there are real Indians on horseback charging towards him. And so that was just a hilarious joke there. And so he's running from the Indians. He finds a cave, and he hides the DeLorean in the cave. And
the cavalry comes right after the Indians too.
And then he runs into a bear in the cave, which is what causes him to forget his boots. He was going to put his boots on, but then he throws them over his shoulder to distract the bear, and ends up falling down a hill and running into a fence and knocking himself unconscious, which puts him into the care of what would turn out to be his great-great-grandparents, Seamus and Maggie McFly.
Yeah, so they have these Irish accents and everything, and and I'm not going to attempt to do an Irish accent there.
They were doing the best they could too.
It's not quite.
It's not great.
It's not great. It's probably just like what I did just there. It's not exactly perfect,
but so again, it presents them with an opportunity to repeat a gag that has been in all three movies, where Marty wakes up in bed with either his mom or, in this case, someone who is
his great
ancestor, but she looks like his mom.
Yeah. So she says at this point, she says, "Well, you're all right now. Back on the
McFly farm."
It's
like
McFly farm.
Yeah. And he's like, "You're my. Who are you?"
You're my. Who are you?
Yeah, So again, some they find new ways to do old gags in this movie.
That's what I wanted to say. Is that the funny thing about this is that even if they're not doing a gag, they will reinterpret things from the previous movies, and it's like that old saying. You know it, right? History repeats itself.
Right. And these movies really play on that a lot, and it's this notion that these certain events keep cycling throughout history in slightly different ways.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm jumping forward here. I just before I forget it, I gotta mention it. The scene where he builds the model. The model,
yeah.
Yes. He even says it again. He's like, I didn't have time to paint it or put it up to scale, or please excuse
the crudity of this model. Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff. Actually, I think it was Marty actually that said at that time. He said
he interrupts him right after.
He interrupts him. Yeah. He's like, I know, Doc. It's not built to scale. It's okay. So it's like he knows Doc so well that he knows exactly what what he's thinking, what he's going to say. But Doc's been busy, since he's been, in the Old West. He's a blacksmith. He's been inventing things. He actually, invents a very early refrigerator.
Yeah.
It's like this just giant, contraption that takes up like half the room, and he's like turning all these like wheels and stuff, and like whistles are going off, and he's like, quick, Marty, turn that handle or whatever. And so he goes through this whole business, and then it just spits out one little ice cube, and he's puts it in his glass, and he's like, iced tea, and then Marty realizes like it's a refrigerator, So he can't resist inventing things even when he's in 1885.
Now here's the funny thing. And here's the funny thing. I realize I say this. Here's the funny thing a lot. Or here's the interesting thing. I guess that's my catchphrase. But here's the funny thing. So he's on to Marty about, causing implications to the future and everything. He builds a refrigerator.
Yeah. And
you see where I'm going with that.
He's doing all this. That's sort of the whole... the main theme or whatever, the plot of this movie is that ultimately, Doc spent all this time trying to warn Marty against, doing things that could change the space-time continuum and affect your future and everything. But Doc is doing, throughout this movie, he's doing exactly that. He's following his heart instead of, following his logical mind. He even invents a rifle, or invents a scope, like a high-powered scope, which didn't exist in those days. And now it's commonplace. You can get these, scopes that magnify your vision, so you can hit targets from much farther away. So he was doing things back then already that wouldn't become commonplace until the next couple of centuries. But So Marty, obviously he goes back to 1885 to rescue Doc. They run into all kinds of problems. He runs into Buford Tannen, nicknamed Mad Dog, because
Mad Dog.
Yeah, it's like, I hate that name. You hear? I hate it. Nobody calls me Mad Dog, especially not some duded up, egg sucking gutter trash.
That's the thing I love there. He when he runs into Buford Dannon, Buford Dannon says, he mistakes him for
Seamus. Yeah, because Seamus had given Marty one of his hats. It's like a derby style hat.
Yeah, it's a very goofy looking hat.
He's like, "Hey, McFly," and Marty turns around. He's like, "I thought I told you never to come in here." "Hey, you ain't Seamus, McFly. You look like him though, especially with that dog ugly hat."
Now, what's the thing with the Buford? The Tannins always bullying McFlies.
I don't know. Again, it's like it's like a generational curse or whatever you want to call it. But it's that whole history repeating itself. It's like they've just had this rivalry between Tannins and McFlies for generations. Mm-hmm. But he has some really good. Tom Wilson has some really great stuff in this movie.
I really love him in this one. Now he calls him Dude.
He says dude a lot.
Now, dude
and runt.
Yeah, dude and runt. Dude is the one that I'm kind of hooked on though, because that kind of throws me out. But I think it's supposed to anyway. I don't know if they've actually said dude in the Old West. Did they actually say dude in the Old West?
I don't know. I think it does. I think that term does actually go back that far.
Really?
We think of dude as being more
like
associated with a surfer
like
type
80s,
lingo.
80s
but
stuff.
I think it actually did because you've heard of like dude ranches and stuff like that. I think it was a cowboy term. It's like a dude was sort of like a euphemism for a stranger. Somebody that was new in town. It's like that.
I guess it's one of those words where it meant something different than it does today.
Yeah.
Kind of like there's a deleted scene in the first Back to the Future where now this might be a controversial deleted scene. I think you know which scene I'm talking about, where Marty's like, "What if I end up being?" Talking to Doc, he's like, "What if I end up being gay?" And then, have you seen?
Oh, right, yeah. I totally forgotten about that deleted scene.
At Doc Brown, he's like, "And why shouldn't you be happy?"
Right. Yeah, I do. Now I remember that. Yeah, it's like, and you can look back on it now, and you can understand why they, left that out. I mean, even though back then it wasn't, they weren't nearly as concerned with political correctness as they are nowadays.
Yeah,
but it's still, I think it was a wise choice. I think that would have changed the tone and the dynamic of the movie a little bit.
Yeah, because Marty generally that kind of seems kind of mean spirited in a way, especially nowadays, saying that kind of line.